Chronicon Mundi.
Dive deep into history.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're picking up with the sources you've handed us, and this time it's the big one, the most consequential and ultimately tragic chapter in the life of Captain James Cook. His third and final voyage.
Exactly. And this wasn't just another trip. This was meant to be the capstone of his career, a final, definitive push to fill in the last big blanks on the world map.
Right. When he sets out in 1776, he's already the most celebrated navigator of the age. I mean, he's a living legend.
He is. But with that fame comes greater, much more demanding objectives. So this deep dive is really focused on two huge goals. The search for that elusive Northwest Passage.
The holy grail of 18th century exploration.
The holy grail, absolutely. And coupled with that is this high-stakes diplomatic mission of returning a very famous passenger, Omai, to the Society Islands. It's a voyage that, as we'll see, starts with bureaucracy and, well, ends in just extraordinary tragedy.
Before we even leave London, the sources remind us that Cook is sailing under a completely new status. This reflects just how immense his contributions had already been.
Oh, he was a superstar. Cook had been promoted to post captain in August 1775. And for anyone not familiar with naval hierarchy...
Which is a huge deal, right? This isn't just a pat on the back.
Not at all. A post captain held the rank necessary to command a major vessel, like a frigate or higher. It meant his position in the service was permanent and established.
Set for life in the service.
Essentially, yes. It was a formal recognition that he wasn't just some great master or surveyor anymore. He was an officer of the highest order, handpicked by the Admiralty for this one final, ultimate mission.
And his choice of vessels, it's consistent with his past voyages, but it really speaks volumes about what he valued in a ship. Yeah. He's not looking for a warship.
No, he insisted on the Whitby-built colliers. And you have to remember, these were broad-bottomed, sturdy cargo ships. They were designed to haul coal along the rough North Sea coast.
Practical?
Very. Cook, who'd learned his trade near Whitby, he just preferred them. They had incredible stability, a massive capacity for provisions, which was, essential for preventing scurvy and a shallow draft.
So he could get in close to coastlines without constantly worrying about running aground.
Exactly. He takes command of his trusted HMS Resolution again, and the new vessel with them is the HMS Discovery, which is under the command of Captain Charles Clerke.
It's worth pausing on that crew roster for a moment, because the list of names is this fascinating intersection of, established talent and men who are destined for future fame, or, in some cases, infamy.
It's an incredible gathering of naval talent, really.
No.
On the Resolution, you've got John Gore as first lieutenant, James King as second, John Williamson as third. King's presence is especially vital for us, as his journals become the primary source for the events around Cook's death.
And then there's the one name that just jumps off the page, knowing what's to come.
William Bligh. He's serving as master on the Resolution, and the master was the expert navigator, responsible for the practical sailing of the ship, totally separate from the lieutenants. Bligh's competence, which was never ever in doubt, was really forged on this voyage.
Beyond the sailors and navigators, this was, as always, a scientific mission at its core.
Absolutely. The Admiralty made sure of it. John Webber was the official artist, and his job was to document everything: the people, the landscapes, the artifacts. He provided the visual record that would later define the Pacific for most of Europe.
And on the Discovery.
You had William Bailey as the astronomer, making sure all the celestial observations were spot on. This was a massive undertaking, and it required a massive investment in talent across the board.
So the expedition leaves London. Omai is in tow. It's July 24th, 1776. This should be a triumphant departure, but the sources reveal an immediate and deeply frustrating problem with Cook's own flagship.
It was a bureaucratic disaster that turned into an engineering failure. The Resolution began to leak almost as soon as they set sail.
Leaking, not just small drip here and there.
Oh, no. As they sailed south and hit that hot, dry weather, the seams in the ship's upper works just opened up. Cook concluded that the initial caulking, the process of sealing the seams with oakum and pitch, had been fundamentally botched by the naval yard.
So this isn't wear and tear. This is just shoddy workmanship before they even left port.
Precisely. Cook's journals detail the absolute misery. Rainwater wasn't just dripping, it was penetrating the decks, leaking profusely through the sides. Officers in the gunroom were literally driven out of their cabins because the quarters were just uninhabitable. They were completely damp.
And that kind of damp affects supplies, doesn't it?
Critically, the ship's spare sails, stored below in the sail room, were ruined before the crew could even properly dry them. It took a vast amount of time and canvas just to repair them. This forced Cook to put the caulkers to work immediately, constantly trying to fix the deck and weatherworks. It's a job that should have been done right in the shipyard.
It really speaks to that constant battle against decay on an 18th century ship, even one commanded by someone as meticulous as Cook.
Absolutely. Yet, despite these physical challenges, Cook's obsession with the health of his crew, a lesson he learned so painfully on earlier voyages, remained his absolute top priority as they headed towards the Cape.
He had his system down by now.
He did. His focus was total. They stopped at Tenerife, but completely bypassed the disease-prone Cape Verde Islands. He enforced his famous procedures, continuously airing the ship with smoke and fires, mandatory drying of all clothes, and that persistent caulking to fight the damp.
And it worked.
It paid off. The sources note that the Resolution had fewer sick men on this voyage than on either of his former ones. Cook had, he'd cracked the code for maintaining health on these incredibly long-distance voyages. It was all about cleanliness and fresh food whenever possible.
So Cook is running a tight, healthy ship. But the other vessel, the Discovery, is creating an immediate logistical problem that puts the whole schedule under pressure.
That delay was absolutely critical. Cook anchored the Resolution at the Cape of Good Hope on September 18th. Captain Charles Clerk commanding the Discovery, he didn't arrive until November 10th.
53 days.
A 53-day delay.
That's an eternity in terms of seasonal sailing windows. What did that mean for the expedition?
Well, the Admiralty had been very clear. They needed a prompt departure from the Cape, ideally by early November. That was to catch the best Southern Ocean winds and maximize their exploration time once they got to the higher northern latitudes in the Pacific.
So Clerk's lateness meant they were already a month behind schedule.
A month behind before they'd even really started. It forced compromises on the entire subsequent route. It's just a perfect illustration of how the success of a major expedition depends completely on the coordination of all its parts.
But while they were waiting at the Cape, they did have a chance to validate one of the greatest technological leaps of the century.
The marine chronometer. This is where science meets navigation in a truly beautiful way.
This is the Kendall watch, right?
The very same. It was checked against astronomical observations done by Mason and Dixon, the famous boundary surveyors, and the chronometer was found to be just incredibly accurate. It showed an error in longitude of only 8 minutes and 25 seconds.
For someone listening who might not be a sailor, can you break down why that level of accuracy is so significant?
Of course. Historically, finding your latitude, your north-south position, was easy. But longitude, your east-west position, was extremely difficult. You often had to rely on a technique called dead reckoning.
Which is basically just educated guessing based on your last known spot, your speed, your course.
Exactly. It's a calculation, but it's prone to massive errors from unseen currents and just bad estimates. The chronometer, by keeping precise Greenwich time, allowed navigators to know the exact difference between their local noon and Greenwich noon. From that, you can calculate your longitude with incredible accuracy.
And Cook realized he could use this to track ocean currents.
That was the genius of it. By comparing the super-accurate chronometer longitude with the error-prone dead reckoning longitude, he could precisely track and measure the strength and influence of ocean currents. That data would refine naval charts and make future sailing far, far safer.
From the Cape, they're instructed to search for a rumored French discovery, which leads them into the desolate world of the Southern Ocean.
Yes, the Admiralty had received these often poorly mapped reports of islands seen by French navigators. This led Cook to Kerguelen Island. They arrived right around the Christmas holiday, hence the name he gave to the landing spot, Christmas Harbor.
And he immediately sends a boat out to check the anchorage, and the master leading that party is William Bligh.
It's an early, very concrete example of Bligh's trusted role on this voyage. Kirk sends him to sound the potential harbor. Bligh comes back and reports that the location was, and I'm quoting here, safe and commodious with good anchorage in every part.
And Cook's own log confirms this desolate but useful environment.
It does. Plenty of fresh water, seals, penguins. But the famous observation is, not a stick of wood. The landscape was just stark, elemental.
And it's here, in this incredibly desolate spot, that they find that amazing piece of maritime history, the French bottle.
It's just the classic moment of exploration etiquette. On December 27, 1776, one of the crewmen finds a glass bottle attached to a rock. Inside, there are documents left years earlier by a French captain, de Rochegoud, dated 1773.
And it's an assertion of discovery.
A clear, physical assertion of French priority. The inscription details their visit during the reign of Louis XV.
Cook's response to this is just a masterclass in professional, understated geopolitical chess.
It really is. He doesn't steal the bottle, he doesn't destroy the evidence. Instead, he acknowledges the French presence, and on the reverse side of their text, he adds his own inscription in Latin.
What did it say?
Nave's Resolution and Discovery de Reg Magna Britannia, December 1776.
The ship's resolution and discovery of the King of Great Britain, December 1776.
Perfect. And he didn't stop there. He added a physical piece of currency as a kind of undeniable timestamp.
Right. Lieutenant Gore notes that Cook sealed the bottle with a lead cap and buried it in a cairn of stones.
Having first placed a 1772 silver 2-pence coin inside, it was a tangible marker. We were here, this is the date, and we know you were here too. It's just a wonderful example of that competitive spirit among European explorers, all played out through these careful, documented assertions.
Leaving that frozen, treeless world of Kerguelen, the expedition then sails east, making landfall at Van Diemen's Land, what we now call Tasmania, in late January 1777. The focus here seems to shift entirely to logistics.
Logistics were everything at this point. They spent time gathering wood and fresh water, but crucially, they were gathering hay for the imported livestock.
Right, because Omai is returning with a whole menagerie.
A whole menagerie, including a horse and a mare, which Cook intended to leave as a lasting contribution to the Society Islands. Keeping those animals healthy was a massive priority.
The interaction with the local Aboriginal natives there, though, provides this deeply reflective moment in Cook's journals. It seems to challenge the whole European assumption that their goods are inherently superior.
The descriptions are quite moving, actually. Cook characterized the natives as a timorous and inoffensive race. But what really surprised him and his crew was their profound indifference to European trade goods.
They just weren't interested.
Not at all. They showed no interest in European clothing or beads or any manufactured items. They wouldn't even trade their own belongings for European things. They'd often just leave any gifts they received carelessly on the beach or in the woods, treating them as things they had no manner of use for.
That must have been a highly unusual experience for a European trading party.
Yeah.
Usually they're met with this immediate demand for iron and beads.
It was a stark reversal, and it led Cook to reflect philosophically. He suggested that while the natives might appear wretched to some Europeans, they were perhaps, quote, far more happier than we Europeans.
Because their lives were simpler.
Yes. They possessed only what nature provided them, and their tranquility was completely undisturbed by the complexities and inequality that defined European society. It was a real moment where Cook, the rational explorer, seems to be questioning the superiority of his own civilization.
So moving on from there to the climax of this first half of the mission, the return of Omai. He isn't just coming home. He's returning as a global celebrity. And the logistics of his resettlement are almost like settling a minor royal.
Well, the Admiralty had invested heavily in Omai's celebrity. They had to ensure his return was a success. He arrives loaded with gifts, but more importantly, with that valuable livestock. The horse, the mare, other animals, all meant to establish new breeding populations in the islands.
But the actual resettlement was managed with a lot of diplomacy. It didn't happen on Tahiti, but on Hawaiʻi.
That was a tactical decision. The chief of Hawaiʻi, a man named Ori, played a pivotal role. He offered protection and support, which was essential because Omai had aggressive neighbors, particularly the Bola Bola men, who were known conquerors in the region.
So he needed security.
He needed security, and Ori was instrumental in providing it, helping him establish a viable estate.
And the design of Omai's new house was very specific, wasn't it? It reveals this tension between European technology and local reality.
Cook details it meticulously, 24 feet by 18 feet and 10 feet high. But crucially, it was built primarily of boards and used very few nails.
And that was a deliberate choice.
A very deliberate choice. European iron was immensely valuable. A structure built with lots of nails would have been immediately dismantled by rivals just for the metal. By limiting the use of nails, they protected the house from being stripped down for scrap iron. And Omai was even planning to build a large, native-style house over the European one for better integration.
But the true measure of Omai's time in England, and what the sources say made him quite happy, was the extensive private arsenal he brought back with him.
His personal armory was significant. It was intended to establish him as a person of immediate power and defense. It included a musket, a bayonet, a fowling piece, 2 pairs of pistols, swords, and cutlasses. Cook even left him with 20 pounds of gunpowder and balls.
Cook's assessment of the situation seems a little tinged with resignation. He seems to think Omai might have been better off without all that weaponry.
He was realistic. Cook saw the arms as a double-edged sword. They gave Omai temporary prestige, sure, but they also potentially made him a target.
And his final judgment of Omai's character.
He saw him as having great good nature, but lacking the application and perseverance to really utilize the European knowledge he'd gained. Cook concluded that the real lasting benefit of the whole Omai experiment would be the imported livestock, not the introduction of European arts or customs. He noted the natives simply showed no inclination to copy them.
So Omai's travels, while a sensation in Europe, didn't really offer much practical change for Polynesia.
In Cook's view, no. But they did leave a lasting physical record of the event. They carved an inscription onto the structure.
A clear marker for any future European visitors.
Unmistakable. Carved on the end of Omai's house was Georgius Tertius Rex, 2 November 1777, Naves Resolution Fac, Cook Pier Discovery Car, Click Pier.
King George III, November 2nd, 1777. Cementing the date and the specific ships involved in this official act.
Exactly. And the departure itself was marked by genuine sadness, particularly from Omai. He managed to maintain a manly resolution for most of the farewells, but when he finally took leave of Cook, his composure just broke.
James King reported that he wept all the time in going ashore.
He did. It indicates a genuine attachment he had formed to the English commander. And interestingly, Cook also left behind 2 Maori youths from New Zealand who had traveled with them. They'd wanted to go to England, but Cook denied them passage. Perhaps having learned from the complexity of Omai's experience, he felt it was better to leave them in a more familiar, if neighboring, environment.
With that South Pacific mission accomplished, the focus turns entirely north. It's now all about the Pacific coast of North America and that ultimate geographical prize, the Northwest Passage.
But before they even reached the continent, they made a massive and completely accidental discovery in January 1778.
The Sandwich Islands.
What we know today is the Hawaiian Islands. Cook named them in honor of his patron, the Earl of Sandwich. They were just heading due north, trying to hit the American coast in time for the spring sailing season, and these islands just appeared on the horizon. Their initial stops were at Kauai and Niihau.
That discovery alone would have made the voyage famous.
And yet it was just a staging post for the main goal.
Which was to find that navigable connection between the Pacific and the Atlantic. Cook's plan was to approach from the west, unlike all the earlier attempts that got stalled in the Canadian Arctic.
The theory was compelling. Surely there had to be an open strait connecting these 2 massive bodies of water, maybe somewhere near the pole. Cook's strategy was to hug the American coast, sail north, and catalog every single inlet and bay, searching for a turn that didn't just end in a fjord.
They made landfall on the North American coast in March 1778, specifically at Nootka Sound in what is now British Columbia. What was the trade like there?
It was described as a brisk and honest trade. Cook actually noted it was carried on with the strictest honesty on both sides. The natives brought an incredible array of goods, mainly animal skins.
What kind of skins?
Bears, wolves, foxes, and crucially, the highly prized sea beaver or sea otter. They also traded weapons like bows and arrows, and lots of carved work. This interaction really established the immense commercial potential of the North Pacific fur trade almost overnight.
But the trade dynamics were very specific. They weren't interested in the usual trinkets.
Not at all. They had a singular focus on one thing. Metal. Knives, chisels, any bits of iron, tin, nails. Those were the most sought-after commodities. They completely rejected things like beads and notably cloth of all kinds, which they just had no use for in their climate. Iron was a transformative material for them.
And this region also provided some of the most striking anthropological details recorded in the journals, especially concerning physical modifications.
The sheer extent of the ornamentation was just shocking to the European observers. Cook's log records these extreme forms of self-disfigurement that were clearly markers of status or identity.
For instance, the lip modification.
Yes. Some individuals, both men and women, had their underlip slit horizontally. And this slit was large enough in some cases to admit the tongue or even a large bone or wooden plug. One seaman noted it gave the disturbing impression of them having 2 mouths.
And it wasn't just the lips, was it?
No. They also strung bone or bugle beads through the cartilage dividing the nostrils. And the women would stain their chins black, specifically to imitate beards.
That detail is fascinating. It suggests a completely different cultural significance for visual markers of, say, maturity or gender identity.
It was a potent reminder to the Europeans that they were interacting with cultures that operated under entirely different aesthetic and social codes. And their military technology was surprisingly sophisticated for defensive purposes, too. They had these jackets made of thin wooden laths bound tightly with sinews, a flexible but sturdy barrier against arrows.
So after charting the American coastline, the ships finally proceed into the crucial area for the passage search, the Bering Strait, entering the Arctic Sea in August of 1778.
This was the moment of truth. They were sailing in waters previously charted by Vitus Bering, but Cook was determined to push further, and the frustration was immediate and total.
He hit a wall.
A literal wall of ice. Cook sailed north, meticulously documenting the coastline, and reached his furthest point at 70 degrees, 6 minutes north. And at that latitude, the main ice pack was just too close and too thick for either the Resolution or the Discovery to penetrate. The open water passage they'd hoped for simply wasn't there.
So they were forced to turn back south. A definite failure of the primary mission.
A failure, yes, despite the thoroughness of the search. But this Arctic venture did give the crew a valuable, if initially misunderstood, source of protein.
The famous seahorse hunt.
Exactly. The boats were sent out to hunt these large marine mammals that the crew at first mistook for sea cows. They were, in fact, walruses.
And was the meat any good? Did they prefer it to their standard rations?
They ate it as long as it lasted. Many of the crew actually preferred it to the standard salt meat, though they described the lean parts as coarse and strong tasting. The fat, however, was highly prized. It was noted for being sweet, like marrow. It was a crucial provisioning stop in a very resource-scarce environment.
And the journals note something about the female walrus's protective instinct.
A powerful instance of it. Cook noted that while the walruses weren't inherently aggressive, the female was fiercely protective of her young. She would defend her calf to the death. If you managed to kill the mother, the young one was almost guaranteed, as it would refuse to leave the side of the dead dam.
Before leaving the North Pacific to find wintering grounds, they made a key scientific stop at Unalaska, and this resulted in some unexpected but vital contact with Russian explorers.
This was a huge validation of Cook's accuracy. At Unalaska, they met a Russian man named Izmailov, and Izmailov generously provided Cook with Russian charts, which Cook was allowed to copy. These charts covered a vast area, the coast of Tartary, the Kuril Islands, Kamchatka. This exchange confirmed the geographical understanding of the region and validated the high accuracy of the exploration work the British had just completed.
So, having been blocked by the Arctic ice, Cook turns south to find a temperate place to refit and provision before he tries for the passage again the following spring. His choice, of course, is the newly discovered Sandwich Islands.
And this return sets the stage for the tragedy. It begins with just an extraordinary coincidence of timing.
Disastrous timing.
Absolutely disastrous. Cook's ships, after cruising the island chain for a bit, arrive at Kealakekua Bay on the western side of the island of Hawaii in January 1779. This arrival coincided precisely with the annual festival for the god Lono, known locally as Erono.
And for the Hawaiian people, what did the festival of Lono, the Makihiki festival, represent?
Lono was the god of fertility, rain, agriculture, and peace. The Makihiki festival was this massive 4-month-long annual celebration of the harvest and the god's traditional return. Lono was often symbolized by an image draped in white cloth, carried on a pole, sailing over the water.
And here comes Cook, a large ship with mast-like structures, white sails, and a commanding white man.
It fit perfectly into the cultural expectation of the returning deity. This was a convergence of religious prophecy and European exploration that, made the tragedy almost inevitable.
And Cook's log, our most authoritative first-hand account, tragically breaks off right as they arrive.
It does. Cook's log ends abruptly on January 17, 1779, right after the Resolution anchored in the bay. From this point on, we have to rely heavily on the meticulous journal entries of Lieutenant James King, who was present for all of it.
And what does King document?
He says that the moment they arrived, the islanders prostrated themselves on the ground, and the priest, Koa, kept repeating the word Erono, Lono, in reference to Cook.
Cook's participation in the Lono ceremonies must have just cemented this divine identity in the eyes of the Hawaiians. What did these ceremonies actually entail?
Cook was fully integrated into these elaborate rituals, often centered at the Hio, the temple platform called Hikau. It was a large platform surrounded by a fence with sacred images, including one of the primary war god, Ku.
And Cook was led through this.
He was led by the priest Koa around the images. He followed the priest in prostrating himself, and, critically, he kissed the image of Ku, which signaled his acceptance of this ritual role. He wasn't just an honored guest. He was actively adopting the persona of the returning god Lono.
Which is a crucial distinction.
It is. 2 days later, a second ceremony took place, involving the ritual sacrifice of pigs and the drinking of kava, with Cook again at the center. By participating, he confirmed his place within their religious cosmology. He likely saw it as necessary diplomacy, to ensure they could get provisions and keep the peace. The islanders, however, they viewed it as the literal fulfillment of prophecy.
Then the ships depart the bay, but only briefly, before being forced back. And this unexplained return seems to be the ignition point for the fatal incident.
The necessity of the return isn't really detailed in the sources, but the fact of it is, the ships returned shortly after leaving. During their brief absence, the Makihiki festival had ended. And with it, the period of peace and the ritual welcome of Lono was over.
So Cook returns during the period of the rival war god, Ku.
Exactly. The period of ritual war and sacrifice. His return completely disrupted the religious calendar. Tensions, which had already been building because of the continuous demand for provisions by the massive English crews, just escalated rapidly.
And it was against this backdrop of cultural disruption that James Cook was killed on February 14, 1779.
He went ashore with a party. His intent was to seize the local chief, Kalaniʻapu, and hold him as a hostage until a stolen ship's cutter was returned. It was a standard, if aggressive, tactic for the era.
But the situation spiraled.
It devolved very quickly into a conflict on the beach. Cook was struck and killed by the islanders. The death of the world's greatest navigator occurred not in a storm far out at sea, but on a crowded beach, all stemming from a local dispute over a petty theft.
The aftermath of his death, where his body was dismembered and divided among the chiefs, was seen by Europeans as this barbarous act of desecration. But the sources give us a much more nuanced, if unsettling, interpretation.
It was an act of profound reverence, not desecration. The sources explicitly note that the dismemberment was considered the normal reverential treatment of the body of a great chief in Hawaiian culture.
So the parts were distributed to give specific chiefs access to the mana, the spiritual power of the fallen figure.
Exactly. It was a shocking practice to the English, of course, but it was entirely consistent with how the Hawaiians treated figures of immense spiritual stature, like a powerful chief or, a god.
The English officers then had the harrowing task of trying to recover the remains. And this was complicated by the deep spiritual confusion Cook's death had caused.
The islanders, having killed a man they believed to be Lono, were in a state of total spiritual turmoil. As parts of the body were slowly brought back to the ships, the islanders accompanying them were asking this bewildering inquiry as to when Lono would return and what would he do to them when he did. They were trying to reconcile the physical death with the spiritual impossibility of killing a deity.
Was the recovery of the body complete? And how do they even positively identify the fragmentary remains?
The recovery was only partial. The body was never fully intact. However, the remains were identified by a very distinct physical marker that only Cook and a few others would have known about.
A scar.
A scar on his right hand, specifically a thumb to forefinger scar. This scar dated back years earlier to 1764 when Cook was injured during an explosion while surveying off the coast of Newfoundland. A bizarre twist of fate that a mark from his early career identified his fragmented remains in the deep Pacific.
And those recovered remains were then formally committed to the waters of the bay.
They were. But despite the tragedy, the responsibility for the expedition now fell upon Captain Charles Clerke, who was already facing his own health crisis.
How did the English expedition react to the violence? Clerke seems to have been reluctant to pursue all-out vengeance.
Clerke, who was already seriously ill with tuberculosis, was hesitant to launch a massive punitive attack. He likely recognized the complex cultural factors at play, but that restraint was not shared by all of his officers and crew. When a subsequent watering party was stoned by islanders, the English reaction was swift and devastatingly violent.
The scale of the retaliation suggests a level of rage, maybe a loss of control.
The sources detail a frightening reprisal. The houses of an entire village were burned to the ground. Those islanders who couldn't escape were either bayoneted or shot. And in an act that mirrored the treatment of Cook's body, or perhaps attempted to reclaim dominance through a similar display, 2 severed heads were placed on poles. A brutal punctuation mark to a cultural misunderstanding that had cost the English their commander.
So the command structure is broken, the primary mission is incomplete, and yet the expedition has to continue. Charles Clerke takes command of the Resolution and pushes the ships back north.
Clerke was a man of immense resolve, despite his rapidly declining health. He secured the return of what he could of Cook's remains, and he also made sure they brought aboard the fatal mast, the damaged mast that had forced their return to Kealakekua Bay, almost as if to prove the logistical necessity of their actions. John Gore then took command of the Discovery.
And Clerke's fate, sadly, followed his commanders.
He was already seriously ill when he took command, and his condition just worsened rapidly as they attempted to push through the northern latitudes again. Charles Clerke died of tuberculosis off the coast of Siberia in 1779.
And command passed again.
It passed to Lieutenant John Gore and eventually to James King, who finally brought the ships back home, concluding the official third voyage in 1780.
Let's turn now to Cook, the author, to his journals. He famously wanted to control the narrative of his discoveries, having been deeply frustrated by previous editors.
His perspective on documentation was rigorously pragmatic. He saw his journals as official instruments. He explicitly stated they were a work for information and not for amusement. He wrote as a man zealously employed in the service of his country and obliged to give the best account he is able of his proceedings.
This was a direct reaction to the editing of his first voyage journal by John Hawkesworth, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Hawkesworth had embellished Cook's plain scientific prose with all this flowery romantic language and even philosophical speculation that Cook just detested. Cook wanted the unvarnished truth. He hoped the candid and faithful manner in which he wrote would counterbalance the want of style, and dullness of the subject. He believed facts spoke louder than literary flourish.
Looking back over the combined scope of his 3 voyages, his cartographical and geographical legacy is just immense, particularly for the Southern Hemisphere.
He is undeniably one of history's greatest navigators and cartographers. His greatest systemic achievement was definitively disproving the centuries-old theory of terra australis incognita,
the great southern continent that theorists insisted must exist to balance the world.
Exactly. Cook had systematically scoured the Southern Ocean, and he showed conclusively that if a continent existed down there, it was confined to the pole far south of 60 degrees latitude, making it commercially useless. He eliminated the last great myth of global geography.
And we spoke earlier about the chronometer. His contribution was crucial in validating that technology for practical worldwide use.
He transformed navigation safety forever. His successful use of it, and more importantly, his rigorous comparison between the chronometer's time and dead reckoning, validated the Kendall watch and the whole system for determining accurate longitude. This eliminated so much of the risk associated with relying on estimated positions. It made all subsequent sailing, naval and commercial, exponentially safer.
Finally, we have to contextualize Cook's death. While it was a shocking moment for the British public, the source material reminds us that sudden violent ends were an endemic risk for explorers of that era.
It was a brutal era, and violence was just one of many constant dangers, alongside disease and storms. Cook's fate was tragic, but it was not unique among his contemporaries. You look at the fate of other great French navigators of the time.
Jean-François Marie de Surville
died in 1770 in a skiff accident off Peru. Marc-Joseph Marion de Fresno was killed by Maori in New Zealand in 1772. Jean-François de la Pérouse was lost in a storm off the Solomon Islands in 1788. Even his own second-in-command Clerke died of disease off Siberia. These men were pushing the known boundaries, and sometimes the boundaries pushed back.
Given the sheer scope of this third voyage, from the Arctic ice fields to the trading posts of Nootka Sound to the deep cultural rituals of Hawaii, what defines the legacy of James Cook, the explorer?
The legacy is definition. He brought clarity to global geography. Robert Falcon-Scott, the Antarctic explorer, later credited Cook with defining the Antarctic region. The French explorer La Pérouse, speaking of Cook's accomplishments, once famously complained that Cook had left nothing for his successors to do but praise him. That level of thoroughness, accuracy, and sheer endurance just closed the chapter on centuries of speculation.
And this leads to the ultimate question for you to consider. Cook's contribution established the physical reality of the planet we all inhabit. Think about the modern map on your wall. How much of what we accept as modern geography, the clear outlines of the Pacific, the certainty about the continents, do we owe to the relentless curiosity and enduring ambition of this one man? That's a legacy that defines the world.